Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our LIHEAP Technical Assistance webinar on the monitoring review process. My name is Benita Sinaraja, and I will be your moderator from the contracted LIHEAP Technical Assistance team at Brilliant. And as a reminder, we are recording this call, and it will be available as a recording on the LIHEAP OCS website at a later date. You are currently all in listen-only mode. After dialing into the webinar, you should have entered in the access code and audio PIN, which are located on your control panel. It's important that you enter in that audio PIN, as that enables me as your moderator to unmute your line so that you're able to speak on the call. When it's time for the question and answer section, you can enter in your question into the question box in your control panel, or you can click on the raise hand icon. And please note, we are going to be holding questions until the end of the presentation. All right, so today's webinar is jam-packed. We're going to be discussing the process of the statutorial required federal monitoring of LIHEAP grantees. We're going to cover preparation and the steps that you need to partake in as you gear up and get ready for the monitoring visit. We'll be talking about monitoring information. What are the documents and information that OCS will review prior to coming for their on-site visit? And that would include program and fiscal information. What to expect when they are on site with you and how that visit will go, and then certainly what happens after the visit in the post-monitoring report and any follow-up that goes along. And along the way, throughout today's webinar, we're very fortunate. We've got some grantees who are also going to participate in today's webinar, and they'll share their experiences with the whole monitoring process as well. And of course, as always, we will have time at the end for feedback and questions. So in addition to our grantee speakers, who I'll introduce in a second, we have some excellent OCS speakers today for all of you. First and foremost, from my team, Tom Reel, who many of you know is our technical lead on the Brilliant team, has spent most of his career working with the state of Indiana and ran his own, the LIHEAP program in Indiana as well. He'll be guiding us through most of the webinar today. Our first OCS speaker is going to be Akam Raman, who many of you know is the Program Operations Branch Chief within DEA at the Administration for Children and Families, and he manages the operations team that conducts the LIHEAP grantee monitoring, the plan reviews, and he provides training and TA to all of the grantees across all of the ACF regions. Another speaker that we're going to be having today is Kate Thomas, who is our Energy Assistance Program Specialist, and she's the Regional Liaison for LIHEAP in the Office of Community Services. She's been with the Operations Branch since May 2015, and many of you should know she's the main point of contact for grantees in Regions 3 and 6. For adding to the financial piece of everything, we're joined by Iris Curtis, who's one of the auditors within DEA, and she's been with us for over 6 years. She works on conducting compliance reviews, reviewing audits related to the single audit report, and serving as the contracting officer representative in other fiscal areas, and she's got over 24 years of experience in auditing, accounting, and analytics. So that's definitely our OCS team. We're fortunate, as I mentioned, to have a state and a tribal grantee speaker with us today. So we've got Tammy Baer, who many of you know, she's worked with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for nearly 19 years. In the first 10 years, she's spent working as a caseworker, determining eligibility for public assistance programs such as TANF, SNAP, Medicaid. And in 2009, she started working as the LIHEAP coordinator and departmental specialist for the Michigan State Emergency Relief. So that's going to be our state grantee speaker today. From the tribal side, we have Janet Ward, who is a Cherokee tribal member and works for the Cherokee Nation. She's a graduate from Northeastern State University, and she's worked for the Cherokee Nation for 20 years. She spent 18 years of that working with the LIHEAP program. She's got a lot of great experience. And in the past 10 years, she's been the manager and LIHEAP coordinator. So with that, I hope you'll give a warm welcome to all of our speakers. And with that, I'm going to move the presentation forward and turn it over to Akam.
Thank you, Benita. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone on the West Coast. Before I introduce a key couple of concepts about monitoring, let me thank everyone who have joined us today. Thank you to our grantees, the OCS monitoring team, and our contractors, those who have made this possible for OCS to conduct monitoring at so many grantee locations over the last few years, and also provide TNTA to our grantees. Monitoring and technical assistance is one combined all hands on the deck approach for OCS. So the biggest question we have on the table before we get into the monitoring process is, why does the OCS or the Office of Community Services monitor the LIHEAP grants? Is it simply because it's required by the law? Well, it is, but there are more to it. So the section 2608B1 of the LIHEAP statute, or 42 USC, or United States Courts Chapter 8627B1 says the Secretary shall conduct in several states in each fiscal year investigations of the use of funds received by the state under this title in order to evaluate compliance with the provisions of this title. And this requirement actually applies to all grantees, not just to the states. We monitor because we would like to make sure that our grantees are operating their programs with maximum effectiveness. We monitor because we would like to determine whether grantees are carrying out the LIHEAP program in compliance with federal requirements. As you know, there are 16 assurances. There are other federal requirements, such as applicable provisions of USC code, which one of them I just mentioned, OMB circulars, Cash Management Act, you name it. So basically, it's an overall process to make sure that our grantees are in compliance with these requirements. We also monitor to determine the needs of annual training and technical assistance. As I mentioned before, our monitoring effort and the TNTA effort, they both go hand in hand. It's inseparable in many instances. Congress actually each year, when they authorize LIHEAP for the last several years, including 2008, fiscal year 2008, they included a language which basically states that the TNTA money, it's roughly $3 million that we have been receiving as part of the overall LIHEAP appropriation each year, is for providing technical assistance, training, and monitoring of program activities for compliance with internal controls, policies, and procedures. So Congress has not only authorized us to conduct this monitoring visits or continue our monitoring effort, but they have also funded our monitoring and technical assistance effort by identifying roughly $3 million in LIHEAP funds for this initiative. Next slide, please. Okay, how do we actually make the selection? It's a good question. We have an internal system, what we call our prioritization and selection process. Before we get into that, let me just quickly mention that during the last several years, DEA has been monitoring roughly 16 grantees per year, and I would say 12 states, 12 to 11 states, anywhere between 3 or 4 tribal grantees, and they are basically selected from the prioritization process. So that makes up the number 16 each year. Basically, the idea is to conduct monitoring of all states with a selected number of tribal grantees within a 4 to 5 year time frame. So if we can keep up with the 16 visits per year, the goal is to reach out to all states within a 5 year time frame, including some selected tribal grantees. So we basically use 3 different types of monitoring. There are mainly 2. So the first one is what we call combined monitoring, which basically involves both programmatic and fiscal monitoring of our grantee. The second major type is our fiscal monitoring, and they can take into two different types. One would be like just a fiscal only site visit, and oftentimes we have conducted follow-up fiscal site visits in response to a combined site visit that had taken place in the previous years. Remote assessment is another way of, basically a way of monitoring our grantees. We have done a few in the last few years. Basically, it's a combined assessment. In other words, it's a program and fiscal review of the grantee, but it's done remotely from our office in Washington, D.C. without conducting any on-site visit. Due to prioritizing document clearance, many of you have received a monitoring report from our office. I just wanted to mention a couple of points. First of all, thank you to everyone who has actually made this initiative possible for us. We have conducted some internal prioritization process for our documents that were in the backlog, and we were able to release roughly 55 monitoring reports as of today. Many of them are initial monitoring reports from fiscal year 2017 and before, although we have released a few monitoring reports from fiscal year 2018 and a very limited number of final monitoring report, which means that we have issued the initial report, we have received our grantee response, and we were able to close the monitoring process by issuing a final report, and you'll hear more about that process later on. Next slide, please. Okay, so OCS uses a criteria-based process to select grantees each fall for our reviews, and this approach allows us to target training and technical assistance to specific issues we have noted during our reviews and in reviewing LIHEAP plans and reports. So OCS primarily relies on the following data sources to come up with a list of grantees through the prioritization process. Grantee annual LIHEAP model plan, which we receive every year from you, grantee carryover and reallotment report, grantee annual independent audit report, and some other relevant reports. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, these sources, these reports and model plan, they have data in it. So we look at the data more closely, and we try to come up with a list of grantees based on some criteria, and I'll give you a few examples here. This is not an exhaustive list. So number and severity of audit findings, level of grantee measures that are employed to prevent improper payments, level of the LIHEAP allocation, in other words, how much money a grantee is receiving in LIHEAP funds, results from our previous compliance review. So we have, as I mentioned, we have conducted some follow-up assessment, and in some instances, those follow-up assessments were based on prior monitoring findings. Training and monitoring performed by grantees, and complaints. We often receive complaints here, not always, but that is also one of the factors in our prioritization process. We also prioritize grantees that we have not visited recently. So if you look at our most recent grantee monitoring schedule, which is posted online, and it is on one of the slides that will be shown later on, you will see that we have been selecting roughly 16 grantees for the last few years. And some of these grantees, and if you go back a few years, you will see that some of the grantees were selected, some of the grantees we visited were actually not visited in many years in the past. That is not the only criteria, but that can be one of the factors in selecting a grantee. So At this point, I'm going to hand over to Tom Real, who's going to talk about the preparation for our on-site monitoring. Thank you.
Thanks, Ekam, and welcome everyone. So let's look a little bit at what the grantees and OCS do to prepare for monitoring. On the next slide, we see that the Office of Community Services, as Ekam just explained, chooses a list of grantees, and usually this list is sent out early in the year. IM 2018-01 is an example, and that'll show the monitoring schedule for the year, and it'll also show the list of the grantees that are going to be monitored. Contact memo is made with each grantee to set up the date and time and the logistics for monitoring. And then importantly, OCS will issue a notification letter to each grantee. It's very important that that letter be looked at carefully because the attachments to the letter in particular have a lot of detail in terms of the monitoring process and what is going to be needed in terms of additional information from the grantee. So as we continue in OCS monitoring, the team initially is going to look at the grantee documentation that is already on hand. So the grantee's LIHEAP plan, the federal report, single audits, additional materials that OCS already has access to. That's in preparation of for the monitoring. They're going to look at that. Now, some of the information then, though, is not available to them and will have to be requested. And so the grantee will need to assemble a certain amount of information, and the list of those materials will be in the notification letter and then maybe in subsequent communication between the grantee and OCS. Usually those additional documents are given due dates that are staggered so that you don't have to put too much of the information together at any one time. The statute specifically says that the state shall make appropriate books, documents, and papers and records available for the review, and books meaning ledgers and financial type books. And so that will be asked of the grantee, and the grantee is statutorily required to submit such materials. So let's turn for a second to our grantee participants, Tammy and Janet. And let me ask quickly the first question to Janet and Tammy. What did you find you had to do to prepare for the OCS monitoring of your program?
This is Janet. What we did is once we got our letter, then we had a meeting with everybody who was involved, our financial people, and we set up a meeting and went over the dates that everything was due to ensure that we turned everything in on a timely manner. And then our grants people are the ones who uploaded it into the database that you all sent them that link to. So we just made sure that we had everything that they requested uploaded into the database, and then that we all knew what the time frame was to get it done.
Very good. And now, Tammy, you have several different agencies and the departments involved. What did you have to do to prepare for the monitoring to start gathering materials?
Yeah, for us, the State Department that gets the grant, we have interagency agreements with 2 other state departments that help us administer different components of LIHEAP. And so it took a lot of, it did take a lot of work. We needed to do some prep early and thoroughly. We had, right at that time, we had a department merger. The Department of Human Services merged with the Department of Community Health shortly before the visit. And so we just had a lot of staffing changes. So that posed a little bit of an extra challenge. So my advice would be, as soon as those letters come out, that the other grantees, take the time and do that prep early and thoroughly So, you know, you're not scrambling at the end. And I think just naturally, because we had so many changes and different entities that I had to reach out to, I felt like we could have done a better job doing that if I had probably, you know, maybe like Janet said, maybe like tried to actually have some meetings instead of reaching out individually to different areas.
So I hear that it is important. This preparation step is very important, and I think meetings, contacts with all the stakeholders involved and all the different departments, it sounds like it's very important. Let's move on to get into a little bit of the monitoring information that is going to be requested. Now, just as a reminder, the monitoring is conducted for the fiscal year 2 years back from the current fiscal year. So the 2018 monitoring, for example, will be a review of the FY 2016 program. As you might expect, in terms of the information requested, you know, initially it'll be the contact information, the key staff, and both fiscal staff and program staff, probably IT staff who might be involved in helping to upload the information to the Basecamp, and other staff as necessary. And they'll ask for the usual information in terms of, you know, the name, title, and contact information. Initially, they will also ask for information about your subgrantees. And anytime we talk in this presentation about subgrantees, if you're, for example, if you're a tribal agency and you don't have subgrantees, a lot of this will still apply if you happen to have satellite offices, or if you're a state grantee and you operate the program through your own county offices, let's say, or district offices. So OCS will send you an Excel spreadsheet to complete, and it'll ask for some overall subgrantee information, the names of your subgrantees, the types of agencies and service areas, some contact information, funding, and any appropriate subgrantee monitoring findings. This is the list for the subgrantees. The next slide shows the list for the tribes, which is just a little bit different list because, again, you might not have the subgrantees. But again, grantee name, agency description, and I think that's important there because the agency, you may want to describe the other kinds of programs that you operate also. Contact information for key personnel, your service area, funding, and again, internal monitoring results of the agency. All of this, again, is to be submitted on an Excel spreadsheet. In the next part of the presentation now, we're going to talk a little more in specifics in terms of program monitoring and fiscal monitoring. And Kate and Iris are going to handle those two sections. And I'll first turn it over to Kate in terms of what more specific information will be requested in terms of program monitoring of the grantee.
Great, thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tom mentioned, the Division of Energy Assistance will request a lot of materials in advance of our assessment in order to study your program. We do request that the documents be uploaded to a database that we refer to as the Basecamp, and we provide usernames and passwords for that database so that all of the relevant parties at the grantee level can upload the information that we request in advance. Some of the things that we request are written program manuals. Those are sometimes referred to as policy manuals, policy and procedure manuals, what have you. We're looking for the operational guidance and procedures and policy that you use to run your LIHEAP and LIHEAP weatherization programs. We also ask for other written guidance, such as any policy memoranda, monitoring reports of subgrantees, action transmittals. Some grantees issue action transmittals to their satellite office or local administering agencies like we administer our action transmittals. So any sort of guidance that you've issued in the running of your program. We ask for state legal references, such as state laws or regulations or legislative passed policies that are relevant as they relate to LIHEAP. And then we also ask for any tribal legal references that your program references in the issuing of the guidance of the LIHEAP program. We ask for written fiscal policies and procedures and any policies and procedures as they relate to all components of the LIHEAP and LIHEAP weatherization program. Next slide, please. State grantees will be asked to provide program management information in advance, including the benefit matrix and payment tables for each of the LIHEAP components, and any supporting documentation for the formulas that they use to develop their matrix. So a lot of the times this may change from the time that you submit your model plan to us. So we do ask for the benefit matrix and payment tables that were actually used in the administration of your program. And if it's based on a formula, which often is the case, we ask for backup information so that we can sort of really dig into that formula and figure out the way that the benefits are administered. We ask for the monitoring schedule of your subgrantees, and again, this applies for states mostly, but some of our larger tribes do have satellite offices, and they may do some monitoring of sorts. So we ask for the monitoring schedule, the procedure you use in monitoring, any checklist or tools that you use when doing your monitoring, and any forms used when monitoring subgrantee operations. And this includes your case file review process and the list of case files that were actually reviewed at the subgrantee agencies. So we can also request those files and take a look at the case files that have already been reviewed by the state or the tribe in conducting its subgrantee monitoring. We ask for interagency agreements, for instance, with weatherization agencies at the state level or other partnering entities at the state or local administering level. We ask for any training materials used for training staff or partners or volunteers, such as schedules, agendas, sign-in sheets, PowerPoints, especially on subjects such as fraud, waste, and abuse, or requesting fair hearings, doing weatherization referrals, calculating income and doing intake, and things of that nature. We ask for your outreach plans and materials, such as the accompanying notices, calendars, advertisements, articles, press releases, newsletters, anything that the grantee does in the way of outreach. We'd like to see evidence of that, as we don't request that during the plan review process. We ask for eligibility determination procedures and forms. We ask for income verification procedures and documentation. We ask for referral forms to and from LIHEAP weatherization and Department of Energy weatherization programs. Those are important to note because we often don't see those. So we do ask for any referral forms that are being used to either refer to weatherization or to other agencies if applicable, and records of formal complaints and results of fair hearings related to LIHEAP for the relevant fiscal year being monitored. And as Tom mentioned, this is always 2 years previous to the current fiscal year. So for instance, next year in fiscal year 2019, we'll be looking at fiscal year 2017 programs. Similarly, if you could go to the next slide, we look at tribal grantees documentations and ask them to provide program management information in advance, including all of the same information that we ask from states. And the only difference would be states are required to hold the public hearing, and we get evidence of that during the plan review process. So during the tribal monitoring, we ask for support of the public participation process. What public participation documentation can you provide that you utilize in developing your LIHEAP model plan? For instance, any surveys that you did or meetings that were held, or if you did hold a public hearing at the tribal level, a transcript or notes from the hearing. And with that, I will turn it over to Iris to talk about the fiscal monitoring documents.
All right, thank you, Kate. So what fiscal information will OCS request from the grantee? What are we going to ask you? In addition to the program list, there are two enclosures. One will have the program items, and then the second enclosure will have the fiscal items that we need from you. So we'll take a look at those. Next. So some of the things we'll ask for are your fiscal manual. And you may have a manual that is generic for your whole agency, or you may have a manual that's LIHEAP specific. If you do have two different manuals, if you could send us that, that would be great. But we definitely want to see what are your fiscal policies and procedures that you have in place when dealing with the LIHEAP funds. For instance, what is your payment process? Who's involved? What are the different steps that are used to make payments, whether it's to the subgrantees or to the vendors? That's the kind of information that we want to see in your fiscal manual. We'll also ask you for several definitions, and those will include obligation, expenditure, and administrative costs. We do not tell you what your definition should be, but we want to look to make sure that it's pretty much on par as far as generically what most people are doing or what our policies kind of say. For instance, administrative costs. What are those specific items that you're including in administrative costs? Because we'll take this information and when we're reviewing the general ledger, we're going to look under the administrative cost detail and see if those items are included in that list. So that's why it's really important that you give us this information before you come. We'll ask you questions. We'll have general conversations with you about it. But if we can receive that in advance, it helps us to understand how you're running the program more effectively. Some of the other things we'll ask for are your carryover report and the SF 425, the Federal Financial Report. And although you submit this information to us in OLDC, the reason that we ask you to provide it to us is because you may have made changes. And we understand that sometimes you may not have made revisions in OLDC. So what we want to do is compare what you submitted in OLDC, and then when we get to your agency, what are the numbers that you have at this time? And let me give an example. I know that for the carryover report, you submit that back in August. Well, when we come out to review your agency, let's say in November or December, once you actually receive your funding for that year, now you have a different number of what you may have estimated in August. Now you have the actual numbers. We want to see, have you revised your carryover and your SF forms to reflect those actual numbers that you have? In addition to asking for these reports, we'd like to see the supporting documentation that you have. What kind of spreadsheet or what kind of information did you use to help you determine what those numbers should be in your spreadsheet? For instance, if you're obligating most of your funds to your subgrantees or to your field offices, you may have a spreadsheet that shows you received a certain amount, this is what you're giving to the subgrantees, and then what you're allotting for administrative costs. All of that data should be what you're using to help you include the numbers in that carryover report and the SF 425. So we want to see those numbers. If you have a cost allocation plan, we want to see that. An indirect cost rate, if it's been approved, we want to see what you have, being allocated among the different programs. Your procurement policy manual, do you have a manual in place to show how you choose vendors, or in your weatherization perhaps how you choose the vendors to use to do the weatherization project. So we want to see that manual. For the grantee audit reports, as Kate mentioned before, if we're reviewing fiscal year 17, we're going to ask you to give us the audit reports for fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 17, so that we know if you had any LIHEAP issues. And then we're going to talk about what were your corrective actions, and we want to see if you've actually implemented that by the time we arrive on the site visit. And the last area is your budget and your expenditure reports. And again, this kind of coincides with your carryover report and the SF 425. But we just want to kind of look at that information to see how your numbers are looking. Okay, next slide. So we also may ask for specific policies and procedures that focus on your benefit processing policies and procedures, or your program integrity plan. How are you working with your subgrantees when you find that they have issues in their audit reports and they have LIHEAP issues, and now you're working with them to correct those issues? Grantees corrective actions over a 2-year period, we may ask to see that information. And what is your drawdown procedure, and what are you using? What kind of documentation do you use, or what is your process, the steps that you take before you make that drawdown? And then tribal refund policies and procedures, how are you tracking that? So those are all the kind of information. And the more information that we have prior to coming to visit with you helps us to understand your program better, so that when we get there, we can have specific questions for you to make sure we're clear on that, but we're not just asking you for everything, so that the process goes a little bit quicker. Okay, next slide. We'll also ask you for a copy of your general ledger. And we do understand that you're not all on the same fiscal year with us. Your state year may be January through December, or it could be July 1st through June 30th. So when we ask for the general ledger, we'll always specify that we're asking for that specific federal year, which is October 1st through September 30th. So that may mean that you're giving us 2 of your ledgers for 2 of your state years, but we just need to make sure that those months in that period is being covered in the general ledgers. And then once we receive the general ledger, we'll take a look at it, and we'll choose some sample transactions. Like, we may take a few transactions of your admin costs, a few from weatherization, a few from just generic client details. If you're doing Insurance 16, we may ask you for some transactions in that area. And we're looking for the backup to see what kind of activities were you doing that clarified it or would make it categorize it as those specific categories. So that's what we're going to ask for. We'll highlight that. We always ask that you send that to us in Excel. It's a little bit easier to work with. And we'll highlight some transactions. We'll send it back to you, and then we'll ask you to give us the detail. And you can send that to us through Basecamp, but it's always, Excel. It's easier to work with. And then that way we'll review that information again before we come out to visit with you, so that when we get there, if there's something that we don't understand, we can ask very specific questions, or if we didn't receive all of the information, we can ask you, to give that information. One thing that I also want to stress is, please make sure that when you're sending this information to us and uploading it in Basecamp, that it does not have personal identifiable information. We don't want to have information that would identify the clients. And if you have any questions about what that looks like or what you should or shouldn't include, please make sure that you reach out to us, because we don't want you wasted. We just don't want to have that information out there for everyone to see. Okay, and the next slide. So in the general ledger that we'll ask for a breakdown of the basic LIHEAP components. So for all of your transactions that relate to administrative costs, we want you to put all of those together so that we can see the total in those different components. We want to make sure that for all of your components, you're staying within the limit. So if you can break them down within those categories, that would really help us a lot. And like I said, we're going to choose sample transactions from each of those categories just to make sure that you're using those funds appropriately and that you're able to show documentation of why it would be in that component as opposed to some of the others. Okay, and next slide. So we'll also ask for information regarding your subgrantees. So in some of the meetings that we'll have some logistical meeting calls with you, and that will be the program and the fiscal staff. So we may ask you to have both your program staff and your fiscal staff involved in those logistical calls. So that we can have contact information, we can begin that communication prior to coming out there. We're exchanging phone numbers, we're exchanging emails so that we can communicate if any questions come up. And so what we'll do is we'll select some of your subgrantees that we'd also like to talk with. And we remind you that we're not doing an audit of or a review of the subgrantees, but what we do when we talk to the subgrantees, we want to make sure that they're understanding the policies and procedures that you have put into place, being the state or the tribal agency. We want to make sure they're actually implementing those policies that you've created. And so we'll ask to see their general ledger. And then we'll get details from them of the information that they have to make sure we'll want to see the monitoring reports of if you're having, if you have subgrantees or tribal, you've done, what kind of information looking at, or what kind of documentation are you keeping regarding what your subgrantees or your local offices are doing. If your grantees have had LIHEAP reports, A133 reports done, where they reviewed the LIHEAP program, if they've had some issues, we want to look at, well, what kind of corrective actions are your subgrantees telling you that they're going to do to fix it? And then what kind of, communication, any kind of documentation that you have of how you're working with them, or what the process is of how they're going to be fixing those LIHEAP issues, so that by the time we come out, it's 2 years later, hopefully those issues will be resolved, or at least we'll see some of the changes that are being made as a result of those corrective actions. And I think the next slide. Then the next slide. Okay, and then the next one is the utility vendor information. A lot of times in the vendor agreements that you have, we hope you're including information about refunds. That's one of our biggest problem areas. So if you have information that says to the vendors, if you can give us a report by a certain date, or if a client has not used the benefit within a certain date, send us those refunds. Those are kinds of things that we're hoping to see in your vendor agreements, so that they know what you expect from them regarding refunds, and that you're actually getting those refunds back when clients are not using the benefits. The other thing is, sometimes you'll have the information of what you gave them for that year, like what the amount is. And so we want to be able to verify that information of what they were allotted, if they were given admin funds to use during the program year, and that's just generally how they're doing. Are they spending the funding that you gave them? If you're halfway through the program year and they haven't used about half of the funds, that's something you might want to take a look at and say, well, do we need to take from one vendor and give to another? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for when we ask for the vendor agreement. Some of you may have several vendors, maybe even 30 or 40. Certainly we're not asking for all of those because that can be, just too much to send. But we may ask for a sample 3 or 4. If you have the different electric vendor, a gas vendor, a wood vendor, we may ask for just a sample of the different kinds of vendors to see what kind of information you're including in those agreements. And from there, I think I'll turn it back to Tom.
Thanks, Iris and Kate. That's real helpful and detailed information. Let's turn back to Tammy and Janet. Well, this is a lot to get together to provide the OCS, isn't it? Maybe you could tell us if you had any particular challenge in terms of, or problem in terms of pulling this information together, either program or fiscal information.
Well, this is Tammy. I think as I had stated previously with staffing changes, I think pulling the fiscal stuff was the most difficult for us in Michigan. Again, not only, is it various state departments that help administer LIHEAP, but then with our own internal changes. That was probably the biggest hurdle. And I think that's why I was trying to emphasize start early. So if you do have those issues like we did, you're not falling behind before the process even starts. And I say that probably because, that's a little bit of what we experienced.
Yeah, Janet, I know with most programs, I suspect you feel that this way too, that the fiscal information is sometimes the hardest to get together because as a program person, you don't have direct control over a lot of that. And so who did you have to coordinate with in terms of pulling fiscal information together?
Through ours, we have several people over in our accounting department who are responsible for specific things in the physical part of it. So we had to work closely with accounting for them to get their people together. That's why I can't stress enough, it's so important that whoever you're going to have to gather information from, that you have a meeting right up front when you first get your letter, because then you can sit down and say, okay, Cliff, this is your responsibility. And so it makes it a lot easier when it came to the physical part. Like the state, we kind of, right before we got our letter, we had some staff changeover. Our director retired, so we had a new one. So the difficulty in that was sometimes it made it hard to gather. We had to find some of the backup. So it's very important. One thing I learned is that when doing this, you need to have all that backup in the beginning when you go in and put that information into your database for whatever. When you do your model plan, you do your report. If somebody else gives you numbers to put into those reports, you need to be sure and ask them for their backup to where they got their information. And
so you're probably going to need that later anyway, right? Is what you're saying. Yes. That's right. Yes. Well, I hear again from both of you too that it is important to pay attention to that initial notification letter, and I've looked at samples of those letters, and they give you a lot of detail about the information, and you get that in time then, and you just take one step at a time in pulling this much information together. And of course, it helps to make sure that you have everything organized in the beginning, as it should be with your program anyway. Let's turn back to Kate Thomas for a minute or two and sort of drill down in terms of what might go on in terms of subgrantee information that might be requested. Kate?
Great, thanks, Tom. Yeah, as everyone has alluded to, it is a lot of information to pull. especially as it relates to getting the information from your subgrantees or any satellite locations, local administrative agencies that you have. That's why we do offer the grantees access in Basecamp for their subgrantees as well as at the grantee level. So they have the option of submitting information to us directly, or subgrantees can also send it through the grantee. It's however you all prefer to do it. We're happy to give Basecamp usernames to account information to whoever is going to be uploading that information, since there's a lot of information requested. Again, it is for the fiscal year period that's being reviewed, and if something has changed or if the policy is no longer in effect, you can note that for the reviewers that, for instance, this policy was in effect in fiscal year 2017, but we've implemented some new policies and we do it this way now. So that helps us to analyze the program more accurately. We do select the subgrantees by prioritization process as well, and we do take into account their proximity to the grantee's location, to your main headquarters, but it's not the only thing that we consider, and we know that the subgrantees that are located near the main office are often chosen, so we try to get out into the field as far as we can so we can really experience the program firsthand at different agencies and see how the grantees policies are being implemented at the intake site level. We request additional, next slide please. We request additional fiscal information related for the subgrantees that we choose to monitor, such as any subgrantee agreements that they have, contracts between the grantee and selected local administering agencies or satellite offices in effect for the fiscal year under review. We look at subgrantee contracts or agreements like Iris mentioned with utilities or bulk fuel vendors or weatherization contractors. We look at the local agency's operations manual. For instance, it may be different or more specific or have caveats or more discretion at the local level than they have at the state or at the main tribal office. So we look at their local agency, at the local level operating information. We look at the local agency's outreach plans. We ask for any internal training materials from the local level to be submitted in Basecamp as well, and any referral forms or procedures and local agency program integrity documents such as fraud, waste, and abuse policies and procedures that may vary from local agency to local agency. We do request, next slide, we request additional information regarding the grantee's monitoring of the subgrantee under review. So for instance, if we choose to go to agency X, we'll ask for that subgrantee's most recent monitoring report. And if that was a desk review, we ask for that information. If it was just a case file review, we ask for that. We ask for any corrective action plans that resulted from that agency's most recent monitoring. And we look at their LIHEAP and LIHEAP weatherization programs. If the subgrantee that we choose to visit was not visited in the year that we're looking at, we will ask for their 2 most recent monitoring reports for that subgrantee. We ask for evidence of their corrective action plans being implemented and any associated audit findings related to LIHEAP or LIHEAP weatherization for the subgrantees programs. We request subgrantee accounting information, such as their general ledger of the revenues and expenditures for the fiscal year being reviewed, and we ask that that is submitted to us in an Excel format. So that's just another reason to get this information requested as early as possible from your subgrantees as soon as you receive your notification or your engagement letter. Often that general ledger in an Excel format takes a lot of effort and time to get to us. After we receive that general ledger of the subgrantees' revenues and expenditures, we'll select some transactions, and then we'll ask for adequate transaction level details such as the amount, the dates, the descriptions, the payees, etc. We ask for the subgrantees' chart of accounts, other documentation that assists our team with interpreting and analyzing the general ledger, and we ask for the transaction samples. And we like to get all of this prior to the visit when possible. So it's a lot of information, but it helps us to verify that the internal controls are being met, and that the breakdown of the subgrantee component cost are within the statutory limits. So for administrative costs, 10%, weatherization costs 15%, or as waived higher, and the assurance 16 costs within 5%. And then we ask for the cost allocation plan and the approved indirect cost rate agreement. And back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Kate. And all of this is to lead up to the actual on-site visit. As we can see, a good part of the monitoring is done by the time the on-site visit is arranged. And that's the first part of it, is that the call will be made to make logistical arrangements for the visit. You'll decide on what persons need to be interviewed in terms of the visit. The OCS team will be a program and fiscal staff person, and sometimes a monitoring contractor staff person. The on-site visit then will give everyone an opportunity for the follow-up conversations that may be needed to obtain further information or clarification in terms of the documents that have already been reviewed prior to the visit. The review will be made then a little more in depth of the grantee's own monitoring efforts, and then of course just conduct the federal monitoring with whatever might be needed. It have to note that as the monitoring progresses on site, there may be the need for additional support documentation that comes up, as say a transaction is being reviewed or a policy is being reviewed. You may be requested to provide more information at that point. So that's something to be aware of too. Where problems are identified, the assessment team then can in person assist the grantee in developing the solutions to those issues, and hopefully a lot of that is cleared up at the on-site visit, and so the later monitoring report is something that is almost pro forma. Finally, at the on-site visit, we'll conduct an exit interview on the next slide. Yeah, and this is usually an in-person exit conference with grantee staff and OCS monitoring team staff. Sometimes, particularly with a remote assessment, that might be done by teleconference or video conferencing. So post-monitoring, what happens after the OCS team leaves and you breathe a sigh of relief for a little while, and and everything is going along smoothly, and then within about 60 days, so that's the goal, that's the target time, OCS then will issue its initial monitoring report to you. And that report will, of course, detail the findings of the review, and we'll look at the outline of that in a minute. The grantee then should plan on responding to the findings within 60 days, and it should the response should then explain detailed actions that the grantee is going to take in terms of findings. If there's any disagreement, or if the grantee doesn't concur with OCS on the findings, then the basis of that non-concurrence, we'll talk about that in a second, should be outlined in the letter, the response. And then, again, there might be interaction and revision in this whole process, verbal interaction still between the grantee and OCS as needed, so that issues can be explained if needed and that sort of thing. In the end, a final closeout monitoring report would be issued by OCS, and unresolved corrective actions at that point will then be listed and tracked. Also, this is a time where the OCS will look at any issues in terms of whether training and technical assistance follow-up is necessary. This is just a brief outline of the report format. You'll see the required action, a statement of the issue, additional explanation of the issue as needed, and each issue should be accompanied with an applicable regulatory or statutory citation. It'll show what required actions OCS is requiring in terms of the grantee for the resolution of the issue, and it'll be listed, of course, issue 1, issue 2, et cetera, throughout the report, and then a summary. And as I said, if there is non-concurrence on the issue, OCS will give the grantee an opportunity to provide its interpretation of the relevant statutory provisions. And in fact, in the grantee's response to the initial report, if you don't agree with the interpretation of the issue, then you should state your relevant interpretations and base it on the statute is the best way to do it. OCS will give consideration then to that grantee's interpretation of the issue, request additional information, particularly if there's question costs involved, and even offer an opportunity for a hearing if there's dollar disallowances involved. But in the end, OCS then will make a final determination of the issue based on whether the problem was, or what their interpretation or what their decision on the problem is. And sanctions may be imposed if necessary if there's dollar amounts involved, repayments of misspent funds, and that sort of thing. So let's turn back one more time to Tammy and Janet, and let me ask, in terms of the monitoring that you underwent, maybe each of you might have an example of a particular issue that was brought up by Office of Community Service in terms of monitoring when you were monitored. Do you have that?
This is Janet. One of the issues was that our carryover and reallotment report, we didn't know that we needed to do an update. We did our original one in August the 1st, submitted it, and then when they did the final one, we just thought that was it. That would be the final updated version. And so between that time, we never updated our carryover and reallotment report.
Did you have an opportunity then, when the team was on site, to sort of clarify this and discuss it? And was that helpful?
Yeah, as a whole, over all of this, it was my very first time that I went through, but going through it, so you start in, when you get the letter, you think, oh my gosh, they're coming too. So you just hit the panic button, and which you shouldn't, because I learned it's a learning process for both of us. It's a learning process for them to learn how the tribes or the states work. And it's also a learning process for us to find out how maybe we can enhance our program to be better. And so,
Tammy, I'm sorry, go ahead, Janet.
Overall, it was very good. I mean, there were things that I think you need to go into it knowing that there's going to be some things that you can do better.
Tammy, when you received the monitoring letter and there were specific issues, how did you proceed in terms of any internal process you used to respond to OCS? Did you farm out the issues in terms of whose responsibility it was, or how did you do that?
It was kind of, I worked with the various agencies or different entities that needed to be, and kind of came up with, okay, what is I'm going to call it a corrective action plan, just because that's what we kind of were considering. If these are things that we need to do to improve the integrity of our program. And, you know, I mean, we had some significant issues that were addressed, and rightfully so, quite honestly. I don't know if other states experience this, but energy assistance is very political in Michigan, and it was great having the compliance visit, because I think that it gave us some backup and support from the federal office that we needed to make some changes. So, I mean, I actually, as you know, as the program, on the program side of things, I actually was very thankful for the visit, even though it presented us with, you know, some work that we need to do, but most all of it is things that I agree with that, you know, we can do to improve our program.
Sometimes I think sometimes as a program manager, you see issues that you can't quite get fixed until you get the authority of the federal review behind you, and that's what you're saying. I think that's true. Do either of you have any overall suggestions for the grantees who are on here that may be facing or preparing for the monitoring review? Do you have any tips or good lucks for them?
Yeah, I think I would say, you know, embrace it as an opportunity rather than looking at it as, you know, a burden. You know, devote some time in advance to the prep, because I think if I had the opportunity to have this kind of webinar in advance, I think that would have been really helpful. So hopefully, you know, the grantees that have not had visits yet see value in this, and you know, understand that that at least OCS also knows that they're asking a lot for a lot of information, but it's being used for a good purpose.
Well, thanks, Tammy and Janet, both of you, for participating today. I know that's helpful. Your comments have been very helpful. If you have other questions as a grantee about the process, on the next slide, you'll see a couple of familiar names. On the next slide, there are ACOM and of course Lauren and the DEA staff are always available to answer your questions. In conclusion, I think I'd just say that you know, I think what we found and what I've heard from the two grantees participating is that this is an opportunity again and I know OCS wants to stress this, that they want to work in partnership with you to evaluate your program and determine practices that are working, and then follow up on goals for improvement wherever they're needed with your program. With the proper preparation and ongoing communication, and I think that the OCS and state and tribal partners can really work hard to achieve higher levels of program performance in delivering these really valuable and needed LIHEAP services. I'll turn it back over to Benina now.
All right, thank you so much. Those were fantastic presentations from all of our speakers. So big thank you to ACOM and Iris and Kate and Tammy and Janet, and of course my dear colleague Tom for guiding us through all that information. Definitely want to point out in the slides we have some very key resources. We referenced the statute, some internal memorandums too. These are very, very, very important to review when it comes to preparing for the monitoring review. So definitely want to make sure we take note of that, and this is available in the slides as well. So with that, we're finally open for questions. So as a reminder, if you'd like to ask any questions, you can either type it into the control panel, or you can click on the raised hand icon and I can unmute your line that way as well. So we'll give everybody a second if they want to ask their questions. I know I already received one question about accessing these slides. So as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and so you will be able to access this entire session whenever you want, and we will post it on the OCS website in a few weeks. It gives us a little bit of time to make it compliant for web posting, and then we will have it up. I will talk to OCS about getting the slides out to all of you and a follow-up communication. I know I've received some questions already of wanting to access these slides, so we will work with them to make sure we can get a copy of the slides out as well. Any questions from the grantees, either for the OCS staff or for our grantee speakers, about just preparing the actual visit, what happened afterwards? I know we covered a lot about the process, and we really want you to come away feeling a lot more prepared, and that this is not as an intimidating process, but something that, as Tom mentioned, wants to be very collaborative between the feds and each of the grantees. So this is your time to ask any question you'd like. Okay. And Casey, I see that your hand, I think Casey from Oklahoma is raised. Did you have a different question?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The question is go to Kate and Acom. We are working on the response to our initial report from the monitoring in 2015, and I am working to get some of the stuff back to you, and I need to know if, like, some of the manual as far as the procedure for in question for us, are we submitting the latest version that we already revised, or you referred it back to the grant year that we reported back for the monitoring, which is 2013 for us?
Hi, Casey. This is Kate.
Yes.
Usually, I think what you're referring to in our, for instance, when we issue you the report letter from the review, when we ask you to submit a new policy that addresses what we've deemed to be a deficiency, we're asking for you to submit a new policy or a revised policy that kind of resolves
taking care of that problem. Yes. All right. So that's what I better understand now, because there are some of the information back 2013 may not be available to me. So I'm kind of trying to search for the information. But now I got that clarified. I appreciate you, Kate.
No, thank you, Casey. And that's a wonderful point to make, because officially the back and forth correspondence between our office here at OCS and the grantee when we're communicating about issues or findings can be a really formal process. It could be a very formal letter stating, this is our finding, this is response, this is our response, and so on and so forth. And so sometimes there's some side conversations that can happen informally where a grantee is welcome to contact the team that participated in their review and say, is this sort of what you're looking for? Does this policy make more sense? And we're happy to sort of say, yeah, this is what we're getting at, or actually there's a few more things that you're really not hitting on that we want to see you address. So we want it to be a transformational experience and not just transactional, as Acom likes to say. And I think that all of OCS really tries to have that kind of approach in the monitoring process, so we can all learn from it and everyone benefits from the programs being enhanced.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that clarification.
All right, thanks a lot, Casey. Another question that we received, this is for OCS as well, is will all grantees at one point be reviewed? No, if Acom or Holly, or excuse me, if Acom or Kate, would you like to respond to that?
Sure, I'll take that. This is Acom. The answer is yes and no, and because of our prioritization system. I mentioned during my presentation that our goal is to monitor all of our state grantees and a selected number of tribes within a 4 to 5 year time frame, and that's where the 16 number came from, plus the resources, and that's made available to us. So yes, it's possible for us to visit all of our grantees at one point or another. In fact, we have been revisiting some of our grantees that were monitored in the past. They are mostly state grantees. And as you probably know, that we have roughly 150 tribal grantees. Not all tribal grantees are selected for prioritization process. We only select grantees that are receiving a sizable amount of grant from us. So yes, it is possible for us to visit all of our state grantees within a 4 to 5 year time frame, and a good number of tribal grantees. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Margaret Zentek. I'm sorry, I apologize if I said that incorrectly, but Margaret, your line is unmuted if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, and you said it correctly. I was checking to see when we can expect to see a posting for FY19 schedule. I saw FY18 was posted February of this year. We anticipate a similar time frame for the next cycle.
Hi, this is Aikem again. For fiscal year 2019 schedule, I can't put a firm release date yet, but I can give you an approximate idea. Usually we go through our prioritization in fall, and our monitoring IM is actually released right after the prioritization process is complete, and we have clearance to announce those grantees. So my best guess at this point is that we will be able to announce our monitoring schedule in fall, sometime in fall.
Thank you, Aikem.
All right, thanks a lot, Margaret. Any other questions from the group? If you are raising your hand, please either put in your audio pin so that I can unmute your line, or you feel free to write in your question and I can ask it for you. I'll give it a second for any other questions to come in. Okay, I think we've got another question for OCS. Has there been any guidance that has come out on grantees' refunds and how they impact your final report? Or is it up to each grantee to amend their reports and work with OCS?
This is Iris. I'll try to answer that. I'm not aware that any guidance has come out. That may be something that we're working on right now, but I don't think anything has come out at this point. It is pretty much up to each of the grantees to figure out, calculating what those refunds are, whether they apply to prior years or the current year. And again, if you have any questions or need any help with working on that, please feel free to reach out to John Thompson or myself, Iris Curtis. We would be more than happy to help you with that.
Great, thank you very much, Iris. Any other questions? We'll give you guys a minute. See if anything else wants to come in. Okay. I think we're going to let OCS off easy today, and it looks like we don't have any other questions in the queue. Tom, did you have any final words before we end the session?
Words of wisdom. I think the message today is preparation, being prepared. It's a Scout motto. But But I think also a word today is the one you used a while ago, Benita, it's collaboration. And I've, in working on this, I've heard from all of the OCS partners and the two grantees, you know, I've heard that word and that concept a lot in preparing for this. So I think it'll be a useful webinar, and with that, I'll end.
All right, thank you very much. And I know I've seen some comments come in, not questions, about some of the participants on our webinar today being brand new to their role. And I think both Tammy and Janet mentioned that they had to undergo staff transitions when they were preparing for this. So it is a big process to undertake, but remember that OCS is here to definitely support you in this and work together. So with that, I think we will end today's webinar. We want to thank you all for attending, and thank you again to all of our speakers for your participation. This was a great session. Thanks to you. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot me an email. That's Benita, and I'll pass that along to our speakers or to OCS as needed. But with that, we'll end today. So thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.